Hello Internet, have you ever looked at your handheld collection and thought, how did this happen? Nintendo handhelds. Have you ever truly lived if you haven't experienced at least one of them? Me personally, the Nintendo handheld I have the fondest memories of growing up was the DS, and I think most people did too. I have memories of me in a car going camping on a road trip, playing Super Mario 64 DS with an action replay because I'm bad at everything that I've ever set out to accomplish. Anyways, today I'll be talking about the history of Nintendo handhelds, so sit back, relax, grab a beer or an apple juice if you're underage, and enjoy my shitty video. The Game & Watch was the first Nintendo handheld, and was a crap little LCD thing, kind of like those Tiger games, but better. Gunpei Yokoi came up with the idea of the Game & Watch while on a train when he noticed some nerd playing with a calculator and thought, you know it would be a great idea. So he made Ball in 1980. Don't get me wrong, he did come up with some pretty good ideas. The Game & Watch introduced the first clamshell design with Oil Panic, and introduced the D-pad with the port of Donkey Kong. The last Game & Watch to be released was Mario the Juggler in 1991. But the actual last Game & Watch that came out was actually a replica of Ball sold via Club Nintendo in 2010. Ah yes, the Game Boy, the brick that conveniently had the ability to play games. The Game Boy, released in 1989, was a revolutionary device, being the third best-selling console of all time, selling 118 million units. The Game Boy had three different variations of it: the OG Game Boy, also known as the DMG Game Boy, the Game Boy Pocket, a smaller version of the Game Boy which is not half the size of a brick, and the Game Boy Color, which added color to the game. All of the Game Boy versions have shitty reflective screens which required you to hold the Game Boy up to a light source just to see the game. In Japan they released the Game Boy Light, which added a backlight, and I wish I could buy one, but The Game Boy also spawned the second best-selling franchise of all time, according to Wikipedia. Pokemon! Pokemon was so successful, they made an entire Game Boy whose sole purpose is to play Pokemon minigames. They were called the Pokemon Mini. The Game Boy also had a link cable so you could have battles or trade Pokemon with other people, or you could just play two-player games. There's even one for the Game Boy Color.
Hello, this is Mark from the future. I forgot about the Virtual Boy. Not surprising, because the Virtual Boy is very forgettable because it only lasted for a year. Also, it doesn't look anything like a handheld. This is what it looks like. No.
The Game Boy Advance, released in 2001, is like the Super Nintendo version of the Game Boy. Better graphics, smaller cartridges, and still had the shitty reflective screen. The Game Boy Advance is backwards compatible with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, so if you like playing Game Boy games horizontally, then you could do that. Much like the Game Boy Advance also spawned its own army of three console variations. The Game Boy Advance SP, which had two models, AGS 101, which had a front light, and AGS 101, which had a backlight. It also has a clamshell design inspired by the Game & Watch series. And the Game Boy Micro, which is the smaller version of the Game Boy Advance with the backlight, and no backwards compatibility with original Game Boy games for some reason. The Game Boy Advance also had a link cable. If you could only have one of the Game Boys, save up money to mod a GBA with a backlight, or pay someone to mod it for you, and there you go. Ultimate Game Boy. The Nintendo DS, released in 2004, was Nintendo's best-selling handheld system, selling 154 million units worldwide. It was heavily designed after the Donkey Kong Game & Watch. DS stood for dual screen, and the reason for that is pretty self-explanatory because, it has two screens. The bottom screen was touchscreen, and it worked more like a PDA than a phone, where you have a stylus, but, it was 2004. No one gave a shit back then. DS had classic games like America's Test Kitchen, Let's Get Cooking. DS is also backwards compatible with GBA games, so you can play all your GBA games on it, but not your original Game Boy games. The DS also had some redesigns down the line, the far superior DS Lite, and some hardware revisions with the DSi, which sacrificed the backwards compatibility with GBA for a camera, a voice recorder, and an animation creator. The DSi XL gave the DS a bigger screen. All of your DS games could be played on the DSi, except for games that require accessories which utilize the GBA slots, such as the Guitar Hero and the DS expansion pack, which came bundled with the DS browser. The 3DS was a massive hardware revision released in 2011. The 3DS focused more on glassesless 3D. The 3DS added an online store called the eShop where you could buy games digitally instead of physically. The DSi also had an online store called the DSi Shop, but shut down in 2016. The eShop had a virtual console similar to the Wii, where you could buy games for the NES, SNES, Game Boy, and some other useless consoles I don't know or gave a crap about. The 3DS had a ton of different redesigns. The 3DS XL, which is just a bigger 3DS, the new 3DS XL, which is no longer new, but it was new at some point, but is no longer new, making the title New 3DS irrelevant. It was basically just a hardware revision fixing the bad 3D part of it, adding amiibo support built in, and being powerful enough to play Minecraft. Wow, what an innovation! The 2DS was a cheaper version of the 3DS, removing the amiibo reader, the clamshell design, the 3D slider, and all my happiness. The new 2DS XL is the 2DS, but good. It brought back the clamshell design and the amiibo reader, but still left out the 3D slider. The Switch is the first console to be a hybrid of a handheld and a home console. Its controller, also called Joy-Cons, can be detached from the console to be played with other friends. If you have friends. While the Switch is great, it still has major problems. First of all, over time, the Joy-Cons start doing a thing called drifting, where the joysticks start moving on their own and becoming unresponsive and possessed. The second problem is the dock scratches the screen the more you take the console in and out. So I made a thing to protect it from that. You can actually buy these off eBay. They're called dock socks. It's a stupid ass name. The third problem is it isn't that major, but the latch that keeps the Joy-Cons from sliding off the console is made of plastic, so it gets broken like over time. Switch is getting a redesign in September this year, the Switch Lite. I've heard people say it sounds like it's going to be bad, but I think it'll be a good alternative for parents that don't want to spend like $300 on a normal ass Switch. I would imagine the Switch Lite would be cheaper because they had to cut a few things like that would bump up the costs, batteries for the Joy-Con, the dock, and the smaller size. Anyways, that was the history of Nintendo handhelds. If you liked the video, like the video and subscribe to my channels. And if you didn't like the video, then because of my horrible opinion, bad execution of the video, and my massive head, and or if your name is Damean and I did the video without you on my channel instead of on NintenBros, then I give you permission to make 300 channels and dislike my videos, all of my videos, and call me stupid in the comment. Okay, bye.